So we're going to talk a little bit about our getting ready for revitalization and start with you personally, how you might prepare for the revitalization journey. Let me say first, right, is to start with engage in learning. Now, we've already talked about some of the engaging in learning here. That's part of what you're doing right here. But what I want to also tell you is that as one of the bonuses, we've given you a bibliography for church revitalization. So you might want to look at some of the other resources and books that are out there. And sometimes it's a book that's specifically on revitalization, like mine I mentioned, Comeback Churches. Sometimes it's a book that's on kind of a healthy church structure and more, or processes. That's like transformational groups, transformational church. But we've listed a lot of others as well in the bibliography. So that'll help you. So engage in learning is a key first step. So that's what you're doing here. So thank you for doing that. But number two, and this is key, you need to share the learning. Okay, so this is key. You don't want to do this alone. You want to, if we think about Kotter's change management, we talk about that some in our leadership course. Kotter talks about first, helping people to see the need, creating a sense of urgency. But right after that, he says, create a guiding coalition. You need to share the learning, and number three, to create a guiding coalition. Again, now we could call it a lot of different things, but I'm calling it a guiding coalition because of the familiarity of some of you taken the leadership course we have about Kotter's change management. But see, let me talk about these two a little bit more. So you need to share the learning, and so what you may want to do is to actually say, we're going through you already have this course if you're watching this, is to say, let's as an elder team. Let me just use generically the term elder, because actually the Bible generically uses the term elder. If you got a vestry or you got a board or you got trustees, whatever. But with your elders and you, sit down and discuss some of the things that are here in these video sessions. Again, if you've purchased this, it's good for your whole church. So share the learning, and in that, begin to get a group of people who are going to form sort of a team or a task force. Maybe it's the elders themselves. Maybe it's not. Maybe the elders are not as representative as a congregation as a whole. So you create a group, a guiding coalition that will help you to walk through this, right? So some churches in a more traditional setting have what's called a long-range planning team. Well, a long-range planning team can be a good place to make that the church revitalization strategy team. And so in 3 to 5 years, here are the changes we want to make, but we start making those in year one in an established church. So again, you're going to engage in learning, you're going to share the learning, you're going to create a guiding coalition, a committee, a team, elders, task force, whatever ultimately it may be, okay? So number 4, right, begin to cast a vision. Begin to cast a vision. You're going to, as you prepare yourself personally, you're going to need to learn to articulate and to cast a vision of what a revitalized church will look like. Don't cast a vision of the change, because change can often be painful for people. Cast a vision of the result. Start with the end. What's the end goal? So when I cast a vision at each church that I've led through revitalization, I said, man, imagine if we were just together as a church. We're all still here, but now our median age has dropped down to the mid-30s because now we've got lots of new young families. We've seen people come to Christ and follow Christ. We've been using our baptistry. People have been baptized as they follow Jesus. We've got new Bible studies, do small groups. The nursery's full. So be ready to cast a vision, because that's what people are willing to sacrifice in the present for something better in the future. Let me say it again. People are willing to sacrifice in the present for something better in the future. And so if you cast that vision for them, that's key. So begin to cast a vision. Number 5, brace yourself. Now, again, I put this right after begin to cast a vision because I love the idea of casting a vision. But you got to brace yourself. And we talked about this in the last session. There's going to be opposition, and sometimes the opposition is going to be personally directed at you. Now, this is what people often miss, right? So people don't come and say, Pastor, I really don't like the idea that we be reaching new people and starting new groups and the nursery being full. What they do is they find some aspect of you and they personalize it, and you're the wrong person to get there. So it's never truly, maybe there are situations where it is, but I've never seen it specifically been, we didn't like the vision. It's we ultimately had concerns about the visionary or the visionaries. So brace yourself for conflict. Right now again, this is hard for people to hear, but again, why would we think we'd be any different? I mean, We look through the challenges of life. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it. If it was easy, we'd have no churches that were plateaued or declining. But the reality is, most church revitalization projects fail because people haven't personally, emotionally, and as a family prepared themselves. No, I literally prepare my family. I say, there's going to be some people who aren't real happy about this, but let me tell you where we're going and how we're going to get there and why sometimes people are going to be mad at your dad. And ultimately, they've seen the journey in a couple of churches when they were young enough. Now they're a little older, it's a little different. But they've kind of walked that journey, and so I help prepare them. Now, also too, I'm really careful not to bring home a lot of that stuff, but still, they might say, maybe hear someone in the church say, well, why we got to make these changes? Your dad's doing so and so, and so I prepare them as well. So brace yourself is kind of a key thing to walk through. Number 6, be patient. Be patient. Now, again, there's a debate that goes on. Should you make changes immediately? Should you make changes slowly? We're going to talk about that through this course because a lot of it depends upon the situation. When I was in one church, we immediately needed to make changes because the bank notes weren't getting paid and the bank was about to take over some of our stuff. So that was immediate. In another situation, I need to walk people through. I walk people through a 6-month to a year process of thinking about who they are as a people, what their vision is, what the community is like. I'm going to share this with you throughout the course, what the community is like. And then ultimately, we decided together the changes that we need to make. Now, again, patience is key. Now, you might be in a tradition where you get to just tell the church how it's going to be. Can I just tell you, I come from a more congregational tradition. And I got to tell you, when it comes to revitalization, everyone's a congregational tradition because people vote with their feet. They express their vote with their voice, and you can be completely in charge, and you and 2 other elders can make all the decisions. That's not the way we do it in my church, but you can do that and make all the decisions, and the end result will be people will still vote with their feet if you're not patient and walk with them and help them to see the journey as it needs to be taken. Right, so that's key. Number seven, relate cross-generationally. Relate cross-generationally. Most churches that need revitalization are older. It's not always true, but statistically, it's going to be a pattern. But if you're watching this, maybe you're older, maybe you're younger, but a lot of times the revitalization pastor is younger than the congregation. Let me tell you a few things that'll help you with that. First, they've seen you come and go before. Maybe you're a new graduate of seminary. I'm not saying everybody is. That's not normally who would necessarily take this course. But maybe you're a new graduate of seminary, and you go into a church that kind of draws a lot of students from the seminaries. Can I just tell you, they've seen you come and go before. You've got to be patient with them to build their trust to ultimately revitalization come, particularly in a rural area. Now, again, I shouldn't generalize that much, but one of the things that rural leaders tell me is that so many rural churches that needed revitalization were led by pastors who saw them as a stepping stone to get into a better setting. That's the way the rural leaders would express it. And so therefore, they just wait them out and go from there. But you got to learn to relate cross-generationally in ways that are ultimately helpful to others. Think about 1 Timothy chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. Don't rebuke an older man, but exhort him as father, younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, and younger women as sisters with all purity. So to do that, you've got to biblically think about how do you engage people. Now, it's hard sometimes because they might not engage you in a Christ-centered, God-honoring way. But that doesn't end the reality that you have to engage them in a God-honoring, Christ-centered way. Because what happens is if you one time sort of lose it, that ultimately undermines you with a whole lot of other people. So again, that goes back to number 5 too. If you brace yourself, if you're already being patient, then you can relate well cross-generationally. It's got to be multi-generational, right? Not just older. But the reality is one of the things that almost certainly is going to happen in church revitalization, not always, but almost always, is that the congregation gets younger. Now, it doesn't mean that your only focus is reaching the next generation, but most churches that need revitalization are older. They revitalize by bringing in younger families. The median age goes down. If you can do that together where everyone's still in a community and loving one another, that's the path you want ultimately to take. Okay, which leads us actually to number 8, is love deeply. Love deeply. It's interesting. One of the churches I led through revitalization, and I just fell in love with so quickly, was a church in a rural part of Georgia where I was serving at the time. It's kind of eventually being taken over by Atlanta, but at the time it was still rural. enough. And I just fell in love with them. I mean, I was there for, I don't even know how long. It wasn't quite 2 years, because but I was kind of a transitional pastor role. Just fell in love with them, led them through. But I remember they knew that I loved them when I went to, the church had gone through a conflict, a split. Actually, the pastor had left with all the younger families to start a more contemporary church. And they asked me to come in and help them to revitalize and transition to what was next. And I went to a little restaurant, and it was a strange thing, but a little restaurant that was, how do I describe this? It used to be a shoe store. Before that, it was a general goods store. It's like one of the oldest buildings in this rural community. Like, I don't know if it was like 100 years old, but I'm thinking it was. And I went into the restaurant, smoke-filled. This was before smoking was outlawed, and I don't think they'd care either way in this part. And I went down to what's called the Liar's Corner of the restaurant. They call it the Liar's Corner because that's where the fishermen would meet, and they make up stories about how big their fish, the Liar's Corner. So I went down to Liar's Corner, through the smoking section, down into there, and it was all the older men. At that time, there were no women that were there. It was all the older men, and that they met like at 6 a.m., almost all, a certain day every week. And when I showed up there, and they were like, "Brother, what are you doing here?" And I said, "I just want to get to know you better." I mean, they began to see, and the second person spoke. The first one asked, "What are you doing here?" The second one said, "Well, our pastor never showed up here." And I said, "Well, I thought I'd fit right in with you guys. I lie about my fish too." And so we all laughed, and we began to build a relationship. And why? Because I know it's strange, but you can love a church deeply if you will open your heart to it quickly. Let me say it again. You can love a church deeply if you will open your heart to it quickly. Now, I know that's hard because that's a little frightening, but I've learned this as an interim. When I became the interim teaching pastor at Moody Church, I chose early on to love it deeply quickly and to relate to it and to think like it and more. And that means changing some things. That means stop talking about your football team back at the college you went to. Nobody cares if you're in another state. All it's doing is saying you're somebody different or you're someone different. Stop emphasizing you're an outsider. Start talking about us and we and our church early on in the revitalization process. That's a key thing. It's how you love deeply. But that's not all. Number 9, right? Love its journey. I mean, again, this is for you to prepare yourself. Love the journey the church was on. For example, the church that I'm going to talk a lot about through this class is actually a church in Indiana. And I love that church. I love this history. I love the fact that it was started by Jimmy Carter. Not that Jimmy Carter, but I like saying that because it sounds like it was that Jimmy Carter. But I love that it was started by Jimmy Carter. I love that it had a passion for its neighborhood, and its neighborhood changed, and it wanted to get back to it. But loving the church's journey or history enables you to value the church's journey or history. So most churches that are going through or need to be revitalized, been around for a while. I mean, not always true. It could be 2 years in a church plant, now you need a revitalization. But even then, there's a history that's there. And so I love, now again, it's unique to have been serving as the interim teaching pastor at Moody Church. But I will consistently, well, let me give you an example. I was preaching through the Beatitudes. And Moody Church comes from a theological tradition that most of you would not. But it's more of a dispensational theological tradition. And when you're preaching through the Sermon on the Mount, there's an older tradition that the Sermon on the Mount is not for today in dispensational, in parts of dispensationalism. I'm not doing a theology course, but it's an important point, so stay with me. So I knew that when I preached through this, I actually don't think that's the case. I do think that Jesus is giving really the ethics of the kingdom of God to be lived now, and this time in supernatural ways in the power of the Holy Spirit. So, but I knew, because I love the church's journey, I knew that some would have a different view of that. So what I did is I went back to read Warren Wiersbe and Harry Ironside and Moody and to find out what they said about the Sermon on the Mount. And I found a quote from Ironside, one of the former pastors, who said, some say that the Sermon on the Mount is not for today. But it clearly is, because, how can you, for example, love those who despise you? How can you, because if it's in the kingdom, there's nobody who despises you. And so by saying that, I loved the church's journey. I honored them by saying, in the past, we've addressed this issue before, though you may have heard that this isn't for today. And someone asked me afterwards, or said to me afterwards, I saw what you did there. I saw what you did there. You knew our history, but you also knew our pastors who taught so that we thought a little differently. And therefore, now I was able to listen better to your message on the Sermon on the Mount. There's a lot of things like that you can do. For example, one church I was serving, they've always had a history of missions. They love global missions. In the denomination, they have an annual missions offering called the Lottie Moon Christmas offering. Now, you probably wouldn't know who Lottie Moon is, but for many, well, she's got a feast day on the Episcopal Church's calendar, and Southern Baptists give an annual offering in missions in her name. And so kind of strange to be on two denominational calendars, but she is. She was a very famous missionary to China. So one church, because I love their journey, I knew they loved global missions. Though they'd small and declined, they weren't able to give a lot to global missions anymore. So what I said is, let's think like Lottie. I mean, this is literally what I said. I asked them the question, if we're going to engage our community, the question is, what would Lottie do? Let's get bracelets, WWLD. What would Lottie do? Because they knew what Lottie did. What Lottie did is she crossed cultures. She actually wore Chinese clothes. She ate Chinese food till she starved to death, giving it away to people that she loved so deeply. And I repeated that over and over again. She loved the Chinese culture so much, she wore Chinese food. She ate Chinese food till she starved, giving it away because she loved others so much. So then, as I repeat that over and over again, and I love this church's journey, and I asked, what would Lottie do? And they would say, well, maybe we should try to relate better to our community like Lottie did. Maybe we should give of ourselves and give away, maybe like Lottie did. And it begins to connect in people's mind. And I think that's a key issue for all of us. Number 10, when you prepare yourself, is be persistent. Now, again, you're preparing this at the beginning. Here's why I want you to hear this. You're going to think this is going to happen quickly and easily once you get it strategically. This course is going to somehow get you to that place. It's not. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to realize that you're going to introduce an idea 3 months after watching this course, and it's actually going to get a pushback, and then 9 months later, they're going to be embracing that idea. So just know that. Just know that you've got to brace yourself for ongoing persistence so that ultimately you see this journey as a journey of persistence in community with others for the glory of God because you love them. Number 11, prepare your family. And I mentioned that a little bit earlier on, embrace yourself, but I want you to prepare your family. Particularly talk to your spouse. You're part of a leadership team. Just say, we're going to have some hard times and make some rules. For example, Donna, I say to the church, and I ask Donna, don't let people come to me through you. So Donna, actually, when someone comes to, Ed's doing so-and-so, could you tell him? Donna's like, no, we don't really do it that way. You would have to communicate with Ed, and et cetera, et cetera. So knowing that is so key. Prepare your family. And number 12, and we'll end here, is I just need you to prepare yourself spiritually. This is a spiritual battle. Maybe battle's the wrong term because there will be battles. So I guess that is the right term. But prepare yourself spiritually for battles that come, but for the journey that you're going to be on. Again, this is a spiritual transformation. We're going to talk about teaching and preaching the Word of God. We're going to talk about praying through challenges. We're going to talk about helping people value the mission that they're on. We're going to talk about many spiritual tasks along their journey. And I want you to see the Church Revitalization don't miss this, Church Revitalization is not an organizational activity. It's a spiritual activity. Again, Church Revitalization is not an organizational activity. It's a spiritual activity. And spiritual activities need to be done biblically if they're Christian. Spiritual activities need to be done biblically if they're Christian. So with those things in mind, we're going to walk through some of the steps of the journey of revitalization. I'm excited to do it with you as well. So we'll continue this in our next session.